Hello, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to WeatherBrains episode 645. It's the pre-show, and look who's here. Our long-lost pal.
It has been a long haul.
Well, do we need to talk about it?
Let's just, am I on the right mic here? No.
Tap it and I'll tell you.
No, I found it. I'm on my usual, and I got to use my snowflake.
Okay. Yes, loud and clear. That's
we had some staffing issues, and
we all do. We've all been there, and we can understand.
Yes,
we'll
leave
it at that.
I think I've worked 11 or 12 of the past 14 weekends.
Ooh.
In addition to all the other issues.
So don't these people know who you are? I mean, goodness, that's horrifying.
Apparently not. Or maybe they do. And they've met me and I'm being punished.
Wow.
How are you guys? I've missed y'all. I still have to do the Fox, by the way. We hired our third person finally. But I still have to do the Fox tonight.
Well, we're glad you're here. It's just not the same.
What is that shirt? Biscuits?
The Montgomery Biscuits. That's got to be the greatest minor league team. In fact, the owner that owns this team, he's got a team in Wisconsin called the Lugnuts.
Oh no! So it's not like a high school or a college. It's a team. I mean, like adults.
This is a professional professional AA Major League or minor league baseball team, AA affiliate of the Tampa Bay Rays.
I'm sorry, I thought you said basketball at some point.
No, baseball. They play at a beautiful park on the river, Alabama River in Montgomery. It's just a really cool little place. So
that's great.
The Gump Monkey Town, Montgomery, Alabama.
There have been so many things I wanted to ask you and the rest of you, but it's been so many weeks I can't remember what they are now. If you talk like social media, well, I guess
what's our name?
Well, no, I mean things happening like I missed the mark. Well, coming here and talking about the Mark Zuckerberg thing and the Cambridge Analytica. It's been that long since I've been here, and maybe y'all didn't talk about it, but.
We were waiting on you.
Yeah.
all we can do is play our social
media, where we can spread the word and grow our reach and find our fans in their newsfeed. Let's get social.
I turned our newsroom onto that maybe 8 months ago or something like that, and it's a meme now here at this television station.
Have you seen the video that goes with it?
Yes, from her on stage. Yeah,
it's pretty special.
Yeah, it's funny.
We'll just kind of leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a little tropical system,
subtropical system. I guess generically, subtropical still okay. I mean, tropical is still okay to say. Well, we'll ask Brian.
Yeah, no, we'll ask our guest.
Tropical is the generic term if we're not specifying. Is that correct, Brian?
I would say from the tropics.
From the tropics.
Handled by the Hurricane Center, right?
Yeah.
So the social science question, Brian, is a lot of people have said, and we should wait to talk about this when the show's on. I hear subtropical, and I think it's nothing, no big deal.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. It's monumentally confusing because we're using a technical meteorological term to describe this system that we quickly say has the effects. We put up tropical storm warnings, by the way, for subtropical storms. So we admit that the effects are the same, but we, being diligent, precise scientists, want to be sure to call it what it is.
Well, we'll talk about it once we get in the show here.
Did you get your AC fixed, Brian?
I did.
Oh, no.
I thought it was going to have to be replaced, but the guy came and said, no, this is a great machine. I said, this machine is 23 years old. He said, no, this is a great machine. They don't make them like this anymore.
There you go.
He's just setting you up for the next time when you can't get parts.
It was a switch. Yeah, well, that's probably true. But people in the building have replaced them, but I don't know. He made it work easily. So there you
go. Brian, you want to share with the group what you got coming up this week?
Well, I'm going to. I'm on WPLG in Miami these days. Let me adjust my lighting. My lighting look okay. And so it'd be first of hurricane season, but here we don't make a big deal out of it. We make a deal out of it, but not a big deal, because people here are kind of savvy and they know that hurricane season doesn't really start until August, the middle of August, really. And then people get all geared up. But so we're going to do something, and I have to figure it out. Actually, tomorrow is my project. Figure out what we're going to do Friday, and then a week from Friday, I don't know. Maybe that's what you're talking about. It's my 50th anniversary in broadcasting, so I'm trying to.
That's what I was trying to get at here.
Yeah, that's a week from Friday. That's the 8th. Yeah, so June 8th, 1968. I started as a disc jockey in radio.
And you're only 49, which is amazing.
Even more of it. Yeah.
And where was that, Brian? Where was that?
I was actually technically in Ogallie, Florida, which is now Melbourne, Florida. Ogallie and Melbourne merged. So in Melbourne, essentially. It was an AM station in Melbourne, Florida.
But we have a little treat for all the listeners tonight, and you were reading that all the way across the Florida peninsula, huh? From where the hurricane was.
Yeah, well, the only reason that this was a kind of rock and roll radio station. The only reason that I would have done that, besides I did news every hour, you had to read the news, but to read a whole advisory was because the tropical storm warning or hurricane warnings, when I say hurricane warnings, were up for the Florida Peninsula. This is the day before it hit. Camille was forecast to hit the Panhandle.
Panama City.
Yes, and they had warnings up all along there, and then it was the next morning that they shoved them over, suddenly to Mississippi, and then it hit that night. So it was, 1969. So what did they know? But that was why we were covering it at all.
So you should just read that live tonight, and James can give you some music, and you can hit the post on the way out of it.
Yes. Well, what format, Brian, was the station?
It was. They called it. What did they call it?
Progressive rock.
Well, it was it evolved to progressive rock. So it was some top 40. So when Hey Jude came out, I was mandated to play that 4 times an hour, the long version. So pretty much
that's pretty much the hour.
And commercials, right? For those hours. But so you'd play popular songs like Hey Jude, but you'd also play Iron Butterfly and Cream and Chambers Brothers and the kind of progressive stuff that was coming out in the late 60s.
So
Classic rock, 99.
Brian then knows why songs like Hey Jude were important for other reasons, because those were bathroom songs, right, Brian?
Yes, exactly. Well, of course,
that was when you'd run down the hall and go to the bathroom.
Most radio stations did not play the long version. Most played the 3-minute and something or other second version.
Right.
But we played songs that were 18 minutes long. I mean, Iron Butterfly, I remember, was a great song where you could actually run out, and I could go out because I had to go check the transmitter. Back then you had to go actually meetings actually on the transmitter.
Right.
Yeah, and I had my first class license to do all that stuff.
Aubrey, when is the television thing up here in Norman?
Can you hear me?
No, you're way muted or muffled.
Okay, I'll have to. How about that? Is that better?
A tiny bit, yes. I think we can hear you.
All right.
I'm in a bay. I haven't gotten my whole setup yet.
Oh.
I am coming. I think it's June 23rd is when I fly in. I fly in on a Saturday. No, Sunday. It's a Sunday.
Okay. And how many
And I'm
days? The whole week?
I'm there until the 30th. Where's my calendar? Okay, so I fly the 24th to the 29th. There we are. 24th to the 29th.
Okay.
Are you going to come visit?
I feel like I kind of have to. Because
Right?
we're the only ones IRL, right, that haven't done.
Yeah.
So I'm
right.
I'm going to see if we can make that a thing.
Yeah, we'll grab dinner with Rick or something, and
Yeah, it's a 2-hour drive, but I'll have to see what I can. Because you're going to be, I don't know. We'll figure it out. So the 24th is when you arrive.
Yeah. So probably maybe that Sunday would be the better day then, because I think I get in pretty early. But yeah, we'll talk about it.
Because you'll be. Do you know what your days look like? Are they like 9 to 5 or?
Do not. I would assume there's something like a 9 to 5, but I'm not 100% positive yet.
Yeah.
All right, I got to call Max real quick. I'll be back.
Well, that sounds very exciting. I was up there some weeks ago, and they were talking about it. Those two women that are running it came and pitched.
Okay.
Oh, it was a media workshop. That's what it was.
Okay.
And they pitched it, and I was like, oh, that would be fun. But for various reasons, I just didn't think I could pursue it.
Gotcha.
Part of it was we've been without a third person for many
Still,
weeks.
Okay.
But I just didn't know when we were going to get anybody, so I didn't
Gotcha.
want to commit to them to take a slot.
Gotcha.
We just hired a guy. He started Sunday, so.
Alexa, turn the office on.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Alexa,
So
Hey, Brian's got an Alexa.
yeah, I'm trying to decide whether that back light is better on or off. Alexa, turn the office off.
Oh, now he's showing off.
well, what's gonna happen now. We're gonna have a copyright problem with him because Alexa's gonna record the whole show, WeatherBrains show, and then send it back to Amazon.
Don't say that too loud because who knows what she'll do.
Alexa, record WeatherBrains, and there's your show title.
79 Fahrenheit with mostly cloudy
Alexa, record WeatherBrains.
showers with a low of 78 degrees.
I was giving you the weather, Kevin.
Somehow that triggered the Miami Beach.
Oh, weather. That's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can just sit and screw with Brian the whole show then.
No, we could do this for hours. This is too much fun here. For those watching on the television side, welcome. It is now 30 after the hour. We're going to start the show here in a matter of moments.
Oh, thanks for the warning. I just said a bad word on TV. Thank you.
Well, that's okay. It's we're loose around the corners here. We're good.
That's for sure.
So, no, this is Tuesday. A little out of whack here this week, but that's okay. The out of whack shows are often the better shows. It's the Tuesday night special. So, I need to be tweeting out that we're about to go on the air for those that would like to watch. Let's see here. It has been a day.
How many people are watching live these days?
I'm about to find out here. Hang on.
On average, 2. It's more than 2. I know that.
Well, there's like 6 here. It's at least 6.
But it's substantive. I see comments go by that people could only have made, watching live.
And they've got some new thing on YouTube. We probably ought to be driving people over there where there's like I think they have a pretty good little chat deal set up over there now on YouTube. But I just don't have time. Time is my biggest struggle in life.
Speaking of, thank you for sparing your time yesterday, James. That second clip was perfect. The first one did not record.
I am here to serve you. That is the easiest thing to do. So you're going to be joining us in this edit bay on a regular basis?
I got to get a setup because they'll be in the studio and show at 10. So I'm now doing the 5, the 6, and the 11. So they wanted me on the 5 also. So they put me on another hour show, but took me off a half hour. So, which is great because it actually works better with WeatherBrains. So
yes, that's all we care about.
So I might be going back to my old days in the edit bay.
Yeah,
Back where I
that's true.
started.
That you
That's
started
funny.
back in the
I
wow.
did.
It's the circle of life,
It
and you're
is.
back. Um,
Would that have been where you were on the first time you came on before you
Yeah.
joined?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think I was
she was
in that
always in
back
an edit
corner
bay.
one.
Yeah. What year would that have been?
I think it was like 15. Because no, it has to have been earlier than that because I got married in 14. Gosh, was it 2013? There's no way I've been on the show this long.
It ages you quickly.
yeah,
Man,
yeah.
I guess. Yeah, I think it was 2013.
Wow.
I thought you said there you got married at 14 and then, well, maybe.
I did live in Tennessee for a while, but not that long.
So here's your odd fact of the day. Birmingham's precipitable water this morning was 2.24 inches.
Wow.
With RAOPS going back to 1950, this is not only a new May record, but it's the highest value on any sounding from November through May in any year.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Alberto brought the moisture.
We might even be at Watts of 2 inches tomorrow. So that for us, that's
Yeah,
huge.
that's big. Wow.
Kim.
It was like 2.75 here yesterday and it didn't rain.
Well,
Yeah.
you're down there in paradise.
Yeah.
That's where it
Kim,
all comes from.
Kim, it's been so long since I've been on the show. I haven't had a chance to say hearty congratulations.
Oh, thanks. What for?
Well, you were out for a while, right, with some sickness.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Gosh, has it been that long,
Yeah,
Kevin?
well,
It's been that long.
The last couple times I was on, I think that you were out, and so then we just didn't overlap.
All right. Well, it's great to see you again.
Well,
Wonderful to have you back.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bill's going to get Max on here. We can probably get started here. Well, I'll give Bill about.
Bill, do
one
I
more.
need to text him or have you contacted him or?
Yeah, Bill's talking to him on the phone.
Okay.
Bill's got that look where he's got our guest. That we've learned over the years, Brian, that the smarter the guest, the harder it is to get them on the show. The higher their IQ, the lower the chance they can figure out Google Hangouts. So,
And I was the first one on today, so that tells you where I am in the pecking.
yeah, I'm about to say Kevin and I were the first two here, so that's it. So, Brian Peters, you want to tell us about your procedure this week?
I'd rather not.
Personal brains.
Okay. Well, sometimes it's best just to talk about these things. I mean, I have been there. And I would imagine many on the show have been there in the same situations. So
I've been there too.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not fun, but it's okay.
So you've let the cat out of the bag. So I have the dreaded colonoscopy on Thursday morning.
Oh boy.
Boy, that sounds like a great time.
Yes.
It's a hoot. It's a hoot.
My doctor and I just bond really well.
That's almost a show title right there.
Yes.
So the last time I had one was let's see, about 2 years ago, and when I came out of it, I just decided I had to go. I got up, and of course they tell you, in recovery, don't get up yet. I wiped out, man. My legs were just rubber.
Yes, you don't get up too fast.
Totally wiped out. It was embarrassing. So,
well, I think what one of the things that's going to be bad is it's scheduled to begin at 8:45 a.m., but they want you to take the last drink 5 hours before that. So I've got to get up at 3:45 a.m. to do something horrible. Oh well.
I'm really glad I waited to eat dinner until now.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's turned into medical fireside chat.
Literally.
talking to these old guys. But Brian Norcross, have you had to deal with one of these in your life?
Yes, it's very exciting. Although that was never an issue. In fact, they scheduled me like 6 a.m. or I had to be there at 5 a.m. I think. It was insanity. That was the thing before the drinking the stuff. That's the worst. For sure.
Amen.
Yeah.
I'm with you there.
All right, let's get this thing started here. I'm looking at the clock on the wall here. We got to go here, so let's crank up the recorders, and here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 645. This is the weekly show that's all about weather. Occasionally we ramble onto other subjects, but mostly weather. Thanks for joining us this week. We are glad you're here. Most of the crew is here. We got Rick Smith, who is working, I do believe, a little severe weather event. Kevin, you're in his neck of the woods. Y'all got severe weather problems out there?
Thankfully, just north of my DMA, but yes, Rick is in the thick of it.
Okay. So how are you, sir? It's been, I think the last time you were here was 1997, so welcome back.
That's probably about right. Oftentimes I will come on and we'll start this show and I'll tell people, you know what, go back and watch the pre-show because it's, usually the funniest stuff, but tonight I'm going to advise that they don't.
Yeah, we talked about some stuff that you just probably don't need to hear about. So, no. So, Kevin, what's going on? How you doing? Good to see you.
I'm well. We had some staffing issues here, and so part of that nonsense was I just couldn't be here for a lot of weeks. But I'm thrilled to be back.
Well, we're thrilled that you're here, and we're thrilled to see Mr. Brian Peters. I went to visit Brian Sunday.
Yes,
I made a house call.
Knocked on my door.
Knocked on his door, and somehow he let me in Sunday afternoon. So if you watched the show last week or listen, you know that Brian spent days and days and days as the weather support guy, 6 days for the Southeastern Conference baseball tournament. So, Brian, how many times did you have to stop the games?
In total, I think it was 9. and we set a new record. They'd never ever before in the history of the SEC had a fog delay.
That's funny.
Wow.
But if you get a chance, the video is really cool because the guy pops up. It's just outside the infield there. He pops up a nice fly ball, and nobody can see it because the fog was right down on the deck. And then all of a sudden, this white thing just appears on the grass. It's like, where'd that come from?
Yeah, no,
so
it was brutal.
What you're saying is they needed a meteorologist to tell them that there was fog when they could stand on home plate and not be able to see the mound? Is that what?
No, they needed a meteorologist because we had numerous lightning and heavy rain delays.
Right. So here brings up a question. How often do you, Brian, you and James actually see each other in person?
About 3 times a year.
Oh, okay.
If that often. No, see, he's working for me when I'm gone.
Right. This is why I asked. Yeah, and he's out chasing or something, and right.
And see, we saw each other, but neither one of us were at our station.
Right.
We were out, and I have to tell about James. He sends me a text, and he really thinks I'm some big deal here with the SEC because he says, "What suite are you in?" And it's like, not in a suite. I'm in the tunnel area with no windows. So, but anyway, it was nice to have him come by and pay a visit.
Now that's a hard job. I mean, spending 6 days, and understand this is not a deal where they play like 1 or 2 games a day. Some of those days, Brian, playing 4, 5 games in a day, and with thunderstorms all around, and you've got to set that lightning ring up. It's hard work. I mean, so I know you're relieved that that's over.
It was especially challenging this year with so much going on. And then Sunday, there was actually concerns. And on Saturday, I actually briefed the SEC commissioner because the SEC has a meeting in Destin that started today.
You know what, Brian? I get this question from time to time, and I don't do it, but doing weather support for a thing like that, or even just like a local concert or something like that. Can you tell people who sometimes ask me? Can you give them? We know you got $1 million for the SEC thing, but what is a fair? Is it an hourly rate? Is it an event rate? How do those things work?
I'm not sure how most people do it, but I base it on an hourly rate.
Can you tell that or no?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
Because I'm probably too cheap.
We're just talking between us girls here, Brian. Come on, man.
Yeah, with all of the WeatherBrains Nation out there. Yeah.
Well, that's why, because people ask me, and since I don't do it, I don't know the answer.
Well, the 6-day event cost nearly $3,000.
Okay. So
so the next question, Brian, what do you do with all that money?
Pay taxes.
Wow.
Ooh,
that's about all.
Okay. Kim Cloco's here. Kim, how are you? What's happening in your world in Oklahoma? Are you out there with the severe weather? What's going on? Rick is working tonight.
Yeah, I was just looking at, there was a storm out by Sayre in western Oklahoma that had been tornado warned. Looked like it was gusting out, had some really strong outflow for a while, and now it looks like it's kind of fallen apart, which is relieving. So yeah, we've been watching some of this stuff happening out in western Oklahoma. There have been some pretty decent tornadoes out in Kansas, southwest Kansas, and some interesting stuff happening all the way down to the Texas Panhandle. So yeah, Rick, definitely busy tonight. Looks like it'll be a fairly quiet evening by the time all this stuff gets out to us in Norman, fortunately.
Yeah, I've been watching all the pictures coming in on Twitter. I wonder how many storm chase teams and tours and individuals are out working these storms. You know, you can put the little dots on the radar scope, and it's just a mass of people out there.
Yeah, but the good thing about marginal days like today is that you can kind of distribute those teams over a sort of broad area. There are, I'm sure, some folks up in Kansas, and there were some probably in the Texas Panhandle that are on this storm. So the best thing we can hope for when the hordes are out is just to get them distributed far and wide.
Distribute the hordes. There's a show title.
That's your show title right there.
That is a show title. Wow. Now I want to do, I want to do that sometime. I want to go out there with Chuck Doswell on his tour. What is those things? Tempest? Is that the one he works for?
I think it's Tempest, yeah.
Yeah, I really want to do one of these summers. I'm going to arrange it where I can make that happen.
Now, you two leading a storm tour on the plains is a recipe for disaster.
No, we would send it right down the tubes.
Right. When the day that happens, the hordes will go to the east and west coast.
Exactly.
and clear a path.
Aubrey Urbanowitz is back she's back where she started from, an edit bay. Wow. Aubrey, how are you?
On my phone. I don't have my good microphone set up yet tonight, but I'm good. I gotta hop into the 10 for my special report, and then I'll hop back and I can be a little bit more visible on WeatherBrains now with a slight shift in my schedule.
Awesome. Well, we're just delighted. But let's bring in Bill Murray and bring in our special guest here, Bill, because we need to talk tropics. We, Kevin, are tracking the tropics, ladies and gentlemen. And before we even bring in our guest, before we track the tropics, we've got to do this because we're tracking.
Now, WeatherBrains is tracking the tracker. We track what the consultants track, so you can track along with us. Does that make sense? Here's WeatherBrains lead tracker, Kevin Selly.
And that's perfect because my pick of the week is actually Brad. No, I picked Rick's thing. But do y'all see the thing that Brad sent out earlier? That was hysterical.
Tracking the tropics.
Yeah. What do you say? I've been tracking the tropics for 23 years and it's never moved or something like that.
Never moved yet.
And his hashtag was stale TV terms. So that was awesome.
Well, I'm so self-conscious now when I use that term because they're just sometimes you got to use it,
right?
And it's just like I have this little Kevin, angel or devil. I'm never sure which one it is.
No, and this always happens to me. James gets a bee in his bonnet about something, and then I somehow get blamed for being the one that is speaking out against it. And I guess I just must get more crazy about it. But James is the one that started that. So
he's the spark, you're the accelerant.
There you go. That's exactly right.
Well, I have a story to tell because we went to the beach for Memorial, or I guess it was Memorial Day. Yeah, for the tropical storm. And so, I check into the Hampton Inn at Panama City Beach, and the kid at the desk is like, "Well, what are you here for?" Because everybody else was checking out and leaving. And I said, "Well, we're here actually, to watch the subtropical storm." And he said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "The people from the Weather Channel are checking in. The main guy, Jim Cantori's going to be here." I'm like, "Oh, that's exciting." So, not, 5 minutes later, Cantori walks in the door. And the bar already has a drink made up for him called the Cantori.
Wow.
And So anyway, that was really fun. But James, the biggest hit of the entire weekend, and I'll have to share this if I can find it here. My wife dressed our 14-year-old in a very special shirt, and I will have to share it with the group here if I can do that. My application window will not come up though. I'll do the entire screen. Let's see if I can pull that off and make this work. Y'all can't see it, can you?
Why, that's me. Why am I seeing me?
We can see.
Yeah, doggone it. I'm gonna unscreen share y'all here for a second. So now I can't do that. All right, now there. So anyway, it's the James Spann is my homeboy T-shirt, and we walk around the hangout, on Saturday night, and he's wearing the shirt, and some guy walks up and says, "I'm a huge James Spann fan. My wife and I wouldn't have gotten married without you." And he went on to this long story that I couldn't follow.
Wow.
Because he had several adult beverages, but
wow.
It was really fun. That was the most popular shirt on the beach this week. So anyway, I'm getting to do the test hangout today of all days, driving back home with Max Mayfield, who's the other half of our dynamic duo tonight. And I'm driving through the town of Defuniak Springs. James Spann, I know you know where that is.
Yep.
And which is a darling little town in the Florida Panhandle. And I, get a call. It's Max. And he's like, "Bill, can we do the test right now?" I'm like, "Sure." So Elle pulls off in, a little town right by the lake. And, I pop up Google Hangouts. And it could not have worked more perfectly. He looked like $10 million. And now tonight we can't make it work. So I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Well, go get in your car. That's...
maybe that would help. Maybe Max should go get in his car. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful. So, but anyway, we're not going to have Max Mayfield tonight, who's one of my favorite people on the planet. But we have one of my other favorite people on the planet, Brian Norcross. Brian, you're celebrating an anniversary here soon.
Dude.
And we're gonna talk about that in a second. But you're one of the hurricane specialists with Max Mayfield at WPLG, right? In Miami, right. Fort Lauderdale, South Florida.
Right, and WPLG, ABC station here in South Florida.
Now you've had a million jobs along the way, Brian, but there's one that we didn't discuss when you were on the show several weeks ago. And
really?
Yeah. You dabbled in country music. What is this about?
No, I didn't dabble in country music. I never dabbled in country music. The way I actually first decided to go back and study meteorology, I was a news director at the ABC station, which is now the CBS station in Louisville. And my weather person, who was this fantastic woman named Angie Humphreys, she was a star in Louisville and great broadcaster, but she was not a meteorologist. She retired to pursue a career in country music. And I decided that we needed a meteorologist just from a competitive standpoint. In Louisville was a active weather market. And I went looking, and I kept offering more and more and more money to where I was offering a lot more money than I was making as news director. And I thought, this seems like a way to make a lot more money for a lot less aggravation. So that's when I went back to Florida State and studied meteorology. And decided to give it a try before I turned 30.
So Brian, you see the danger of reading every other word in a book, or about every fourth word. Because I was looking in your book jacket or in your book today and reading your bio, and that just caught my eye. And all I saw was dabbled in country music. I didn't know that meant something else along the way. Now, James Spann, you got a piece of sound that Brian sent us, and I don't know.
Hang on, give me a minute. I'm sorry, I have been falling. I've been falling down on the job here. I'll be loaded. I'll load it up here. Hang on.
So 50 years ago, Brian, tell us about your first job.
So June 8th, 1968. They gave me a chance to be a disc jockey on the AM station. It was called WTAI. It was in what's today in Melbourne, Florida, 1560 AM daytimer. And it was a Saturday in 1968, and I got to sign the radio station on. I'd been kind of hanging around the radio station, answering the phone, and I actually had been on the radio a few times reading the news, but that was my first real shift that I kind of got compensated for. And they compensated me by giving me trade outs for gas and meals at a restaurant and stuff. There was no cash involved. But
All
anyway,
right.
I thought that
Let's roll it. Let's roll. I can't wait. Here we go.
Let's run through now the latest hurricane statement on Hurricane Camille. Dangerous Hurricane Camille stalls temporarily. Hurricane warnings are in effect on the northwest Florida coast from Fort Walton to St. Marks, and gale warnings elsewhere from Pensacola to Cedar Key. Preparations against hurricane-force winds and 5 to 10-foot tides in the area from Fort Walton to St. Marks should be completed tonight.
So that was obviously 1969. So that was the year later. I was 18 at that time. I was 17 when I started in the year before on the radio. And the only reason that I was reading that whole advisory was because Camille was supposed to hit Florida. This was Saturday. It ended up hitting Sunday night, and it was supposed to hit the Panhandle. So I read the whole advisory. Otherwise, we would have just done, just a little headline. But by the way, the news I read that same day was that there was this rock concert that was taking shape in this farm in New York called Woodstock, and that the Apollo 11 astronauts were in a parade in Houston, Texas. And I don't know, all this iconic, epic stuff was going on. And I'm just kind of reading it there on the little wire copy on this little AM radio station. So it's funny to look back on that.
So did y'all have like a NOAA weather wire? I guess it wasn't NOAA then, it was ESSA.
No,
it an AP wire or something?
It had I think it was a UPI ticker, a printer. There was, and you go and you rip it off, and every hour they had a summary, but they also passed the advisories. They came from the Weather Bureau. If you heard that, in 1969, the Gulf was handled by the New Orleans Weather Bureau.
That's right.
As opposed to the National Hurricane Center.
So have you studied that storm a lot since then, Brian?
Yeah, so on the anniversary a few years ago, I did a number of pieces for the Weather Channel, and talked about this a lot with people that, of course, Marjorie Kuiper and Chris Lancy and some other folks did this reanalysis of it, and there was a lot of controversy about it. Marjorie put together this really fantastic radar loop. I don't know if you've seen that. Actually, by stitching together the images off the New Orleans radar, you can see it. You can see the eye wall replacement cycle, but you also see that it doesn't look like it ever gets a final real eye wall when it comes ashore.
Wow.
And the other thing that's dicey and weird about Camille is when you look at the film that was taken after the storm, you see a lot of trees with even some leaves on them, or pine needles on the trees and bark on the trees, where after Andrew, the trees were stripped and snapped, and it was a more apocalyptic scene after Andrew. So anyway, there are all those questions in a practical sense. On the other hand, it's hard to argue with the 904 or 900 millibar pressure that they actually measured. A reputable guy with multiple barometers measured 904, and because of where he was related to the eye, they estimated the pressure to be 900 millibars. So how do you argue with a 900 millibar pressure on a relatively small storm in terms of the wind speed? So anyway, it's interesting based on the images that you can see, both radar and just the physical landscape.
And over 30 foot surge.
Yeah, I think it was 24. It wasn't 24 with Camille because it was 7.9 with Katrina, in essentially exactly the same place. As a matter of fact, with the house where the guy, Breath, I don't remember his first name. Last name was Breath. He had these barometers, and they went dashing to try and find a safe spot during Camille. And he looked at the barometers, and he had real ship's barometers. They were good barometers. And he's the one that they hang the pressure measurements on, and they tested the barometer after the fact. That house was destroyed in Katrina, same place, same area, but a bigger part of the coast. Obviously, Katrina's storm surge was higher and broader than than Camille.
Brian, I think of that all the time whenever I'm on the that Sunday afternoon before Katrina, when we would ask people in places like Bay St. Louis that were eating in Burger King at 6:30 at night, the night before the hurricane came ashore, and why haven't you evacuated? And the general answer was we went through Camille.
Yes, no question about it. I was both after Katrina. I was there, but I was actually in Biloxi on Highway 90, driving from Florida State to New Orleans for Mardi Gras that following February in 1970, and still there. It was still as far as you could see from Highway 90, and half of Highway 90 was missing. So Highway 90 is kind of two levels, and the level of the highway, the 4-lane, closest to the water, was gone. And so you had to drive two directions on the other one. But there was nothing you could see that was standing that had all the walls looking north from there. And I saw stop signs where the metal was bent back on both sides of the post, and the whole thing was leaning. So it was fierce. It was stunning, no question about it.
Did you ever talk to Neil Frank about that storm? We've never been able to get Neil on the show. Ryan, I always wanted to ask him about it.
I did. I talked to him on the phone about it relatively recently, as a matter of fact. I mean, relatively recently in terms of the anniversary. So the anniversary. What would the anniversary have been?
August 17th, 1969?
Yeah, 69, but I'm trying to think, because obviously the 50th anniversary is coming up next year.
Probably the 45th.
So maybe it was the 40th anniversary or something like that. That I talked to Neil about it, and Neil made, as he always does, some really excellent points. I wish I could share them with you, but I put it in. I wrote up some stuff, and anyway, I did stuff on the Weather Channel about it. But there was the issue with the airplane, with the aircraft, because they didn't get any observations in that time leading up to landfall. I think there was something wrong with the airplane, as I remember that they had sent out there, but they had good observations well offshore. It's amazing. It's a combination of amazing how much they knew and how much they didn't know back in those times.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, on that Saturday, most of the planes were tied up in Operation Storm Fury with Hurricane Debbie that was over in the Atlantic.
I forgot about that. Yes, that's correct. But there was an aircraft problem. I'm almost certain.
I do remember that.
It had something to do with the lack of data.
I know that I remember, I've read those advisories many, many times. I used to pretend like I was a disc jockey reading those advisories. That was the difference between me and you and Span. I had to pretend with my turntable and playing, Deep Purple and, different things like it was 1969 all over again. But, that I think that, there was an observation on that Sunday afternoon that, indicated the really low pressure at the last second that kind of made them go from 160 to 190 in the advisories or something like that.
Well, what they assumed was that they didn't really know about eye wall replacement cycles. So they didn't understand what the mechanics of that were. They didn't really understand what they were looking at on the radar. And I don't remember now if the Hurricane Center could see the New Orleans radar or not. But in any case, New Orleans could see the eye wall replacement cycle was very clear. But what the write-up in, is it BAMS, where this was all written up, Marjorie and Chris Lancey's paper and the other folks that did that work, what they talked about was that they didn't really understand that was a clear sign of weakening, and then the re-intensification. So when they originally estimated the wind speed at landfall, they kind of made a linear ascent because it was increasing in intensity, increasing. And during that gap that they didn't have a reconnaissance, they just kept it going. So that's how they ended up at the 190. In the reanalysis of actually having the radar and looking at that really terrific radar loop, who wrote this up and has a link to the loop, by the way, is Jeff Masters on Weather Underground wrote this up some years ago, and he put a link in there. So if you Google him, you can get to that loop that Marjorie put together.
You know, and eyewall replacements, obviously we know a lot more about them now than we did then. But does the pressure necessarily fluctuate with the eyewall replacement, or is it just a wind thing?
It's mostly an angular momentum thing. It's mostly a you have a larger radius of winds there, and therefore the winds go down. In Andrew, during the eyewall replacement process, the pressure did came up to 937, and then it went back down to 922 after landfall, as the eyewall replacement was completed, and the eye ended up being very tight. And then you had, within Andrew, you had this other phenomena that we see in these ultra strong storms now, that we can see because of the resolution that we have, where you can really see the mesovortices that form, and that was in Andrew. While I was watching the, by today's standards, very crude WSR 57 output on television, I saw this ultra intense cell develop in the northern eye wall, and it was a VIP level higher than anything that we had seen. And so later I realized that was this vortex that was really what caused the incredible damage in the first wave of Andrew, and it actually displaced the pressure center north of the geometric center of the eye. So if you go back and look at where the pressure center in Andrew was, it was actually kind of almost 2/3 of the way north. And Homestead, where the storm went directly over Homestead, the second wind, or the first wind there, came from the northwest, even though the eye went directly over it, because the pressure center and that mesovortex was rotating around like this. So going the other way, rotating around like that. And so he ended up with this northwest wind as being the most significant damaging wind on the front side. And then the big wind in Homestead was actually on the south side, and that was when that vortex came all the way around the eye. So anyway, now we know a lot more, that it's not just the eye wall replacement cycle, it's also these mesovortices in the eye wall in super strong storms.
Brian Peters, it seems to me that most of the storms approaching the northern Gulf Coast in the past several years, I'm sure I'll think of something now that I've said this, but they go through eye wall replacement as they approach the northern Gulf Coast. So are we just lucky in some regard there, or is there some reason why that it gets into the pretty close to the coast, or is this just a crazy observation by me?
No, I don't know. You'd have to ask an ERC person. The thing that was unique about Camille, which I think is kind of where you're going, Bill, is that Camille, like Andrew, was strengthening as it came ashore. That's really unusual based on the storms that we've seen in modern times, with modern observations on northern Gulf Coast storms, right? There's supposition about why that might be the case, including the fact that Camille, like Andrew, was small, and therefore, in the case of Andrew, there was supposition that perhaps that small diameter, when the wind hits the land, so you have this change in roughness, it deflects to the left, which actually tightens the eye. If it's big, that's not a significant effect. If it's big, you bring in more dry air off the land. If it's small, you don't have that effect so much of pulling in dry air from long distances. So a theory is that small diameter storms, small diameter circulations behave differently near the coast than large diameter ones going north.
So that would be an example of a Charlie or something like that. It deflects to the left.
But Charlie, because Charlie was going kind of parallel to the coast.
Right.
But when a storm comes directly at the coast, you think of this wind going this way, and it's going to hit the coast and slow down and want to turn left, which is actually going to tighten the storm zone.
Okay.
That didn't want to work in a big storm, but that could work in a smaller storm. Anyway, that was the discussion of the science of Andrew. Andrew was the most researched hurricane ever up to that time. That was part of the discussion of why was this so incredible and how did it keep intensifying after it came ashore.
I was in the lobby of the hotel at 5 a.m. yesterday morning, and up and working on our website and monitoring the storm and all these things. And of course, I walk in and the breakfast crew is has Weather Nation on. I said, hey, you guys might want to put it on the Weather Channel because all these jokers are going to be down here in a minute, and you want to be on the Weather Channel. They said that's not the Weather Channel, but let's don't split hairs here. Let's just change the channel. And so they changed the channel and they get up there. And one of the specialists, I don't know if it was Dr. Nab or who was on, I don't know who was on at 5 a.m, but they were talking about, the difference between subtropical and tropical. And, what was the Hurricane Center going to say in the next few hours? And, we were seeing this dry air coming all the way around the system, and it just didn't look likely that it was going to be able to become tropical. How do you know which it is? Because I started researching, on the fly, and I found Bob, the guy from Florida State, has a cool.
Oh, Bob Hart.
Yeah, Bob Hart's cool site, and it showed it just barely inside the tropical.
Right. It started out being just barely inside, and then actually the forecast was for it to be more inside at some point. But the thing about Alberto was, what kicked it off in the first place? What kicked it off was the trough. It wasn't the tropical processes that kicked it off. Once it was going, it had tropicalness to it, and it was over the warm water, and the thunderstorms were trying to form around the center and so forth and so on. But the thing that kicked it off was the trough in a very baroclinic, non-tropical mechanism. So that's what made it subtropical to start, is that it had both processes going on. But the thinking was that once it got to the north and got directly under either the cutoff or the trough, where you didn't have enough shear, if it had enough convection associated with it, if the dry air didn't get in and just blow up the convection, if it had enough convection, that would eventually warm the column enough that they could call it tropical. So that was what they were thinking. Is the way it worked out, the dry air just kept that convection from ever getting strong enough to do it, and it's a kind of a messy thing. It actually looked better over Alabama.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
And it was interesting last night, and really right before landfall, the western side of the storm became the dominant precipitation side.
Well, that's another indication that the trough is driving it, because the trough is on the west side. So you have the colder air, and depending on where it's lined up with the storm exactly, you can get the lift on the west side. The thing that's driving it north, the trough actually has to be some kind of steering trough to the west, right? And so the lift on the front side of the trough, trough can enhance the left side of the storm more than the right side. Most often you see this in October hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
They come up and bend off to the east, right? They come up from the south of the Caribbean and bend to the east. Quite often the west side is the stronger side, because that's where you're getting the baroclinic forcing.
Well, I know
from the trough that's doing that recurving.
In 1975, Hurricane Eloise was one of my first storms that, was 13 years old and had a, fairly good chance to watch it. I'm calling the radio station, talking to the guy, because there was no NOAA weather radio or anything then, and getting him to read me the advisories, back.
Yeah.
And I think the trough played a role obviously in deflecting it to the northeast, which was unexpected, but also causing it to intensify in the hours leading up to landfall.
Yeah. So it's this good trough, bad trough problem that you always have with when you have significant interactions. Is too much trough and you get shear and problems. Just just the right amount of trough, and you can actually get outflow and actual baroclinic enhancement, especially later in the year, where you can actually get a little cold air loft too, and create a bigger vertical gradient.
So James, man, you shared a video on your Twitter feed of some little tiny vortices at a hotel or condo project somewhere down there in Panama City Beach. Those were amazing.
I thought that was that resort where you stayed down there, Bill. Looked like some fancy place. No, it was really odd. It was like a dust devil. It was a vortex, and it wanted to just kind of sit around that pool, like a magnet was holding it there. And apparently people say that stay there. Those things happen on a regular basis, but just not quite as intense as that, with the wind field from the tropical system helping to enhance those things. But that was like way too cool. I mean, you know, that's one of those cases where I would probably want to get in the middle of that thing. I mean, I love dust devils, and I would love to be out there in that. That was just too cool.
Well, it was almost small enough that you probably could have held it in your hand if you could have caught it.
So
yeah,
it
took those inner tubes and just flung them. I mean, those inner tubes went whoop. I mean, they were like up on the 8th floor, and they come back down and then go back up again. It was just awesome.
So this was caused by the wind field interact with the building somehow.
Yeah.
Because so you know, if you think about it, this is what Ted Fujita, after Hurricane Andrew, came to Miami, was asked to come down here and finally did. And Dr. Greg Forbes was part of that team, as a matter of fact, looking at the damage in southern Dade County. And Fujita declared there were no tornadoes in Andrew. These were all essentially spin-ups from the ground, vortices caused by shear within the wind field, caused by either roughness changes or downbursts or whatever. But the thing is that if the wind is blowing along at, let's say in the case of Alberta, it's blowing at 40 miles an hour, and because the effect of the shear or the effect of the building enhances it by 20 or 30 miles an hour, or 20, 30% or 40%, which generally is the thought of factor there, you know, you're ending up with significant winds that can actually make a noticeable difference. On a normal day, we call them just gusts. You know, the wind is not uniform, but they're really noticeable when the wind is really blowing.
Well, it was amazing, the wind on the east side of that storm yesterday. Really, I guess the southeast quadrant right after landfall. The amount of wind that came into the eastern side of Bay County, because we actually crossed the bridge over into Panama City, while the sun was out and, the rain had stopped, but the wind suddenly jumped into the, 40, 45 mile per hour sustained, 50, 55 mile an hour gusts. And, I really thought we might have to go and get in somewhere for a little while because, it was some strong wind. It
was really blowing here in Miami yesterday too. I mean, it was because of, there's a pretty good high offshore and the gradient there between those two really did it. The most amazing video I've ever seen that actually shows this phenomena in some fashion came out of Maria. There's a video from Jabacoa in the southeastern corner of Puerto Rico where the camera is, I think, looking southeast right into the storm coming right at them, and the wind is ripping in the direction you would expect it to be ripping from left to right, and then suddenly it's ripping stronger from right to left, and it goes on and blows cars around and everything from right to left, and then it turns around and it goes back the other way again. The most amazing video. I showed that to Dr. Forbes, and he couldn't say what exactly it was either. I mean, my suspicion was that it was one of these spin-up vortices, but it lasted so long. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that, but that video is worth looking at. Look at Yabacoa. They pronounce it Jabacoa, but Yabacoa, 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 Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. Incredible video, YouTube.
There's a lot of news this week. Of course, there are estimates that, over 4,000 people perished in Puerto Rico, I guess, is at least an indirect result of Maria. How did that disaster become so forgotten for most of us, Brian?
I think because we had Irma and Harvey before it, and Puerto Rico, most Americans that live on the mainland don't really understand. A lot of people think it's a foreign country, and so that was complicated. And the modern politics is complicated, but I think fundamentally it was because of Irma and Harvey. But this phenomena of indirect deaths, so direct deaths and indirect deaths. And by the way, I saw a lot of social media today kind of blaming the government for lying about the number of deaths. I mean, they actually have a credible effort underway. It's just not done yet. The Harvard people that came out with their study, which they did a different methodology than the government sponsored study to try and figure out how many people died, just came out with their report first. So I'm not ready to quite so quickly say that somebody's trying to hide something, because I think it's a month or two till the government study. But the other point is that in Hurricane Sandy, I worked on a story with the New York Times after Sandy because the city of New York decided, for a complicated set of reasons, not to evacuate 37 nursing homes that were in the evacuation zone. And they fundamentally didn't do it because they did it in Irene. They didn't end up needing to. And the storm surge forecast was the same, 4 to 8 feet for both those storms. And they hadn't yet gotten paid for the reimbursed, and they didn't know where they're getting the money for the Irene evacuation, because Irene came into the tropical storm, so FEMA doesn't reimburse for tropical storms. And so it was this whole big complicated thing. Well, they were carrying elderly people out of these nursing homes in the raging water, right? And I had seen a report, but I never saw the follow through that the death rate among those people was much higher because of the stress they encountered through that event, or was higher. I don't know, it was much higher, was higher. So, would they be counted as indirect deaths? If they were, that would change the Sandy, death toll to a significantly different number as well. I remember after Hurricane Andrew, the question of when do you stop counting is a significant question. People were rebuilding their homes for years after Andrew and falling off of roofs and, hurting themselves or killing themselves with chainsaws and whatever tools of various kinds that they wouldn't have been using had it not been for Andrew. Well, at what point does that not count? I want to say they stopped at 6 months. They counted for the first 6 months, I think, was the generally accepted time period.
So, Brian, we're getting into seasonal forecasts and all these sort of things now, and we've already had Alberto. Have you seen any evidence that having a storm in May makes the rest of the season potentially less active overall? I've heard some people say that over the last week, and I haven't done any studying of that, but is that a possibility?
It's my understanding from Phil Klotzbach that there is no correlation between early season storms, because the mechanisms are different, right? I mean, this storm was really, if we hadn't had that very sharp trough, really an extratropical kind of situation. If we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have had Alberto probably. And so you have to think that it's really got to do with the sharp trough. Now, for many, many years here in Miami, there was a saying that a dry May increases the likelihood of having a hurricane. And the reason is that the subtropical ridge, the Bermuda High, in a dry May extends farther west. So therefore hurricanes come farther west, if that pattern persists. So there was a correlation that I think it was Paul Hebert, when he was working at the Hurricane Center and then running the Miami Weather Service office, did, but that made that correlation some years ago. But I don't know how strong a correlation it is. But my understanding is early season storms are not correlated to what happens during the tropical season when the jet stream has receded well to the north.
Brian, take us back. You were a DJ, obviously, but talk about why you got into weather and how it became hurricanes for you, other than obviously living in Florida.
Well, I grew up in the 60s with the space program. My father was an engineer at NASA. My high school girlfriend's father was prominent in the Apollo program. I met the astronauts. I mean, it was, living was an incredible time and place to live. And I was a sciencey kid. I built a computer when I was for my science project in 8th and 9th grade in 1964. So I had the science background, but I really loved radio. And so I got into radio and eventually, after doing a whole bunch of stuff through the 70s, including being engineer and director and producer, I just thought before I turned 30, the way that science merges with broadcasting was doing the weather. And so I was a math major, physics minor as an undergraduate. So I went back to Florida State and decided, let me see if I can do the weather.
So you and Max kind of did it the same way. You were both math majors, huh? Who went back and got your master's at Florida State.
Right, exactly.
Were you there at the same time?
No, because I had a gap between. I was out of school for 6.5 years between my undergraduate and graduate. That's when I was, doing all this other TV stuff, producing news, running news departments, directing, engineering, stuff like that.
And dabbling in country music, the rumor I started earlier tonight. So
yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Wondered how that fit in there. So that's interesting. But you worked closely with Hurricane Center directors, obviously, your time in Miami leading up. And Max was the director then, right?
Well, Max was the director. Well, Max and I became acquainted with Max really, I think, after Hurricane Andrew. Mm-hmm. Because up to Hurricane Andrew, and
that was Bob Sheets, I guess.
Bob Sheets. I worked extensively with Bob Sheets, and even after, Bob and I were on committees together and lots of stuff. But I became, I was at the Hurricane Center more, and I had met Max, and then by the late '90s, when Jerry Gerald was director, and Max was number two. We worked together much more, and we would have him on television along with Jerry. And then when Max became director, this was a time when a lot of things were changing, and technology was broadcasting technology and communications technology, and all the things we learned from Andrew were coming into fruition by the late '90s. When I started, just to give you an idea of the technology, when I started the Cone in 1992. All we could draw were these segments of lines because the graphic system wouldn't fill in the cone. In '96, we got the graphic system that I could finally make a cone. And just we were getting into a more modern era in those late '90s. So a lot of the ability that we had and the Hurricane Center had, a lot of things that Max implemented that really came into play in the mid-2000s, the 2004, 2005 seasons, the things that he was doing at the Hurricane Center. We worked together closely, but he really led the way to the modern generation of communicating in hurricanes.
I know that Max was burned out after Katrina and probably made him retire earlier than we wanted him to. It seems like we've got a Hurricane Center director turnover problem because of that burnout issue. Any comments on that, Brian? And what advice would you give to Ken Graham coming in?
Well, Ken is terrific, and Ken is a great communications guy. I've said for many years, and I'll say again tonight, that the hurricane forecasts are pretty much as good as they need to be. The problem is that we can't communicate them. We don't have a mechanism for getting people to understand their risk and understand the uncertainty and understand the issues with the forecast. Now, that's not 100% true because we really don't have an average forecast error problem. What we have is an outlier problem, right? The big threat is from the kinds of storms that can go wrong. And as we saw with Harvey, they were forecasting essentially a tropical storm to barely hurricane strength at landfall. It ended up being a Category 4, and that was only 2 days out. Now it ended up hitting a very unpopulated place, but if that had been a major city where evacuation decisions were going to be based on the category of the hurricane and all these kinds of things, you could certainly imagine a real problem that when they didn't realize until a day and a half out that they actually might have a Category 3 or 4 hurricane on their hands. So, I mean, not that there's not scientific work to do, but the science has gone up at a much greater rate than the communications ability has gone up. In fact, I think in actual fact, communication ability has gone down because messages are so fragmented now compared to what they were when you turned on the television and the Hurricane Center would tell you what they knew, the local meteorologist would tell you what they knew, the mayor would tell you what everybody should do, and that was all the information there was. Right? That was it. So as Kim, I'm sure, would agree that messages are a challenge to communications.
Oh, it's so challenging. And as much as, we're trying to find new ways to communicate, we're adding more and more things to what we're saying too. And we actually don't know. And I've had some really great conversations with all of our colleagues at the Hurricane Center about, do we know what sense people are making of all these things together as a package? And so that's one of our next frontiers, is trying to figure out, every bit that we're trying to give them more, is that helping them in different ways. I think Bill has passed the baton to me in our chat here to come back around, actually, from Harvey back to Maria. I'm really interested in something you mentioned, Brian. You said that there was a federal study going on of the fatalities from Maria. Do you know who's doing that? What agency might be responsible, and anything about how their methods might differ from what the Harvard study did?
I don't think it's federal. I think it may have some kind of federal funding, but the governor mentioned it.
Oh, okay. It was a governor. Okay.
So then there were two parties involved in it. But the thing, the way the Harvard study is essentially a statistical study, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. They went around and kind of figured out what the right percentage was of people that died, and then applied it to the general population, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a way to do it. That's not a way to get a precise number, obviously, but it's maybe not an unreasonable way to do it. But
right.
And again, I'm dredging this up from a news report. I'm sure you can Google the governor there and what he says about it, and you might be able to find
yes. Okay.
Whatever that was. But anyway, Kim, what you said, I think is a fundamental question, and that is, are people, the idea that more information, more detailed information, makes better communications is the fundamental underlying premise of the way things have evolved.
Mm-hmm.
In weathercasting in general, right?
Yeah,
and including at the National Hurricane Center. I mean, it's not an unreasonable philosophy, but I think that my sense is that it does not communicate with the public. Now, it may communicate with scientists, doesn't even communicate with a lot of emergency managers that aren't savvy. They want somebody to aggregate the message and tell them what that all means, right? And so I think we're down to who is going to do that. Right? Mm-hmm. Where is that going to be done? And is that going to be done, by the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center, private individuals? Where is that aggregation going to happen? To me, that's the fundamental question for the future.
That's a great question. And it's even tougher in this era of, social media access, where people are sort of becoming their own aggregators, and they're selectively trying to aggregate their own, put together first person sources, and they're trying to make these determinations for themselves increasingly. So it's a really interesting dynamic that we're playing into as we offer all this information. Who is responsible for trying to put that together into the meaningful whole for all of these diverse groups of people with diverse needs? I think you're right. There are some incredibly interesting new frontiers that we're coming to in talking about communication. It's not just trying to create the single perfect product. It's really not. It's about trying to hone in on a means of putting out a message that puts it all together and really makes sense of it. That's a really great point.
Yeah,
Hey, Kim?
although I really think that the evidence is that people still tune into television when one of these things is happening. They may not watch television ever in their life, but they get together and watch television when there's a big threat like this. And I think that's because that's the closest we have to an aggregation point of the information. They still go online, still looking on their phone, looking wherever, but that's the closest we have. It's not necessarily well aggregated there, but it is somewhat. You leave it on and you kind of get this aggregated message eventually.
Yeah, definitely. Broadcasters, I was thinking this too. Broadcasters really still shoulder a lot of the burden of being that aggregation source. And while there are more people turning to social media, especially the youngest demographic, you're really looking at broadcasters to do a lot of this. This is where some of we actually have some research interest in this at the lab. How are broadcasters absorbing all of this, and can they use and make sense of all of these different graphics? We're putting forward worst case scenarios for storm surge, best guess tracks for placement of the hurricane, and just depicting both of those things on the same screen, you might see two different hurricane scenarios, right? So it's actually a really interesting question. What are broadcasters doing with this? Are they offering some, maybe just overall superficial gist messages? Are they helping people to understand all these different potential cases? How are they adapting?
Kim, what are you guys must be looking forward to? You find the best way to craft not the perfect message, but maybe the appropriate message for different groups. But at some point, have you started to look toward, okay, you find these solutions, there's no way to enforce them. So you're going to have rogue television stations or radio stations or social media weather presenters sending their own message that's not uniform. What are you guys thinking about that?
The research community at large is definitely concerned about that, and that's something we're looking to the hurricane folks from the Severe Storms Lab perspective. We're looking to the hurricane community as sort of this really neat example of people who are going into this frontier we're trying to get into and communicating uncertainty information in more diverse ways to meet more needs and to communicate more of the attributes of what's possible. And we're all sitting back kind of wondering exactly what you're wondering about. Are there perceived inconsistencies of message with all of this, or are people making a story out of it? Is there a narrative that they sort of get the overall gist? Even if there are folks who go out and are, as you're saying, rogue, it can be really hard to identify what does it really mean to be a rogue operator. Maybe they're just focusing on a slightly different part of the whole story, and people maybe recognize that. So there's a lot of questions there about how that all works.
Do you think some government organization or somewhere, NOAA, National Weather Service, would, or maybe it's one of the the AMS or the NWA, would ever take some sort of a role in monitoring and saying, hey, you know what, I think you're stepping over the line there?
They may well. I think if someone can point out that there really is a problem, of this inconsistency that's causing a real challenge for people. I know, Brian, you've actually been a part of these early conversations about defining what even is inconsistency, and you pointed to NOAA as a potential leader that people should try to conform to this central message throughout the community. And I think that this is actually a really interesting area that we're still not sure what the effects are, what inconsistency that is really troubling truly looks like.
I still go back. What was last year? You and I and Rick and Laura were at an IWT meeting You remember it was sometime last year, but
Yeah.
I wrote about this, but I almost think about it every day. Laura had the greatest line, Laura Myers. She said, "Are you creating anxiety or awareness?" And it's so simple. And I think if we spread that amongst the enterprise, it can only help, I guess.
Yeah, that's such a great guideline. And you're going to create anxiety. One of the surest ways to do it is to always be hammering on the worst case scenario and to not contextualize it as perhaps this is a low probability outcome, but here we wanted to showcase what's possible. If you're making it seem like that's the reality, the only reality, and it's very certain, then you may be triggering people that way. So that's great advice, and it goes hand in hand with thinking about the ways we communicate uncertainty. If we're communicating anxiety or fruitfully.
Yeah. Do you have any sense? I hear from time to time. Do you have any sense of? This maybe isn't the right way to ask the question, but how frequently, what percentage of the population? The natural tendency is for people to go, "Oh, everything's going to be okay," and maybe not take an advisory or a warning seriously. Does that make sense as a question? Do most people do that, or am I making that up? Their default is to say everything's okay and maybe not take action.
In the post-event studies that have been done, that actually doesn't look like it's representative of most people. Most people do take these messages seriously, and they may not take shelter right away. Maybe they can't. Maybe they wisely know that a hazard is conditional and they're waiting for more information. In that situation, people often become information seeking, and so they're trying to get information from a multitude of sources and confirm the threats really for them. That's what most people tend to do.
Thanks.
My point, Kim, was that really I don't see any other entities in our society with a shot at being credible enough to rise above the noise other than the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service. I'm not saying that they have established that fully, right? I'm not saying they haven't established it all, but fully. But I'm just saying I don't know who else it would be. And another little tidbit: during Irma, I wrote these Facebook posts, and they averaged a little over 2 million reach a day, but the peak was in day 6 through 3 before the storm. That's when there was this information void. And so when I've gone around speaking to Irma, I've been talking about that because I think there's a real lesson there that this is when decisions are being made. And this is when understanding is being desired, is way in advance of when you really know what's going to happen. Yeah. So it's not just fashioning, this idea of the scenarios of right now. It's fashioning the risk statements and understanding of the situation, many days before, especially in with big cities involved and complicated cities involved and big storms involved and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. They need a lot more time, which puts them into the place where there's a pretty wide range of scenarios for what is possible.
Right. So sometimes that's not a way to communicate that. That's just not a way to can't be done that way, that far out.
Hey, let me take a break here, y'all. Let's see, Aubrey, can you do email this second, or I know you're back in the studio. Let's see if she can do email.
Yeah, I can. I don't have my microphone hooked up though. Do I sound okay?
Yeah,
it sounds so good. It sounds so good. I'm just going to roll this music, and I just have a funny feeling you might have one or two to read this week.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
It would help if I actually had my email up, wouldn't it? Well,
I can ask Brian a quick question while you search.
There you go,
Aubrey. I saw this go by the other day. I think John Morales was in it, and it was just fascinating to me that in South Florida, in the summer months and maybe a few months before and after, that especially graphically, that it's kind of not practiced to post or show or even forecast overnight lows because everybody knows it's going to be either side of 70 degrees. Is that true, or am I making that up? Did I dream that, Brian?
No, that was my what I did, and that's what John does. But it's either side of 80 degrees, by the way, here in the summer months.
So you don't post them graphically?
No, we don't normally put them, because what we'll generally do is replace that with the pops or some kind of statement to try and differentiate one day from the other. Now, I never used, when I was doing local weather, I never used pops. So what I wanted was a little more space to say things like rain more likely, or some kind of verbal statement to make, if I saw a trend in the weather that was I was able to determine, at least I thought I was able to determine, to be able to make that clear, like passing showers or PM storms or whatever.
I thought that was interesting. Okay, Aubrey, did that give you enough time?
It did. It loaded. Sorry.
You're welcome.
Switching back and forth, trying to get my new flow down. All right. So this one comes in from Candace Monticelli, who's a meteorologist. I'm a young meteorologist working in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and love the show. Just want to say thanks for all the hard work that everyone puts in. We are fantastic. And apparently we are, get this, a blast to listen to. And she was just training for a half marathon and actually listened to our shows, and she did not fall asleep. So that is that's really good. Apparently we kept her calm and sane.
Did she send that to the right show? That
I think so. It's addressed to us.
That was for Radio Lab.
Thank you, Candace. We appreciate that. And this one is this is a kind of a message. I guess it was via Facebook. Someone has read the book, The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea by Jack E. Davis, which last month was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for History. Really good book. And I believe Bill said we are booking him in September.
Yes, Scott Martin got in touch with him, and I'm really excited because he's going to be talking about Nash Roberts.
Oh,
in that did we lose? Oh, there's Brian down on the end. He's over there. We're going to be talking to Nash Roberts, which is going to be a real, not to him, about him. It would be a real thrill to talk to him.
Yeah, what would have been 100th birthday?
That would have been a show title.
Yeah, that really would have been a good show. But I'm really excited because I've always wanted to have Nash on the show when he was alive, and we missed that opportunity. But we'll be talking about him, and of course he was a fixture on the Gulf Coast, so we have scored him off.
Awesome. So we are looking forward to that. I guess we'll have to wait till September. Also, this one comes in from Patrick. Hi, WeatherBrains crew. My name is Patrick, and I will be attending the University of Tennessee at Martin in the fall studying meteorology. Patrick loves the show and definitely looks up to James Spann. I hope that one day I can be a meteorologist like James. Thanks, Pat. Boy, look at we're getting spoiled with all these really nice emails.
Send him one of those t-shirts, homeboy t-shirts.
And Steve Bauer, the jazz man from Kansas, sent us this note. A Missouri storm chaser told friends in his obituary that he wants them to launch his ashes into a tornado, saying that will be fun. So the funeral, apparently he did die, unfortunately, living with a heart condition. After he had a lifelong passion for weather and ham radios, and chased for years. But we don't know if he was actually launched into a tornado.
That sounds like a business model to me, right?
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean,
it's the add-on for the tornado tours.
Yeah, $1,000 for a drone, and then whatever else. Somebody would, Kim, we need to figure a good price on this and know what the market size is. Can you get on that? How many people would do that? I want to do that.
And then we need a research on the effects of the tornado after the ashes go in.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Sounds fun, guys. Real fun.
I think there are people that would do it. James will do it.
Stand out in the yard in Norman and do it about once every wow.
James, will you be the first to sign up for that when you pass? Can we drone you into a tornado?
As long as we stream it live on YouTube, I'm in.
So an interesting email segment. So if you'd like to send us an email, a comment, an interesting article or a note, or hey, just
something that you like about us. Man, that was nice. You can always submit those to email at weatherbrains.com. You can also follow us on the Twitter and the Facebook, email at weatherbrains.com. Also some good links. We always like to see some interesting links. We're all on Twitter a lot, but not that much sometimes.
What happened to the time here? It's like it's just like we're just getting started with Brian here, but we've got to take a quick break for Brian's Professor Peters and WeatherBrains 101 and Tony Rice and the Astronomy Report. And we're going to come back with Weather Roundup, Picks of the Week, and a whole lot more. And Bill, you got to take the hosting duties here because I've got to go do some television. So let's roll these. We'll be right back as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
Last week, our guest on WeatherBrains mentioned a dry line in his discussion of the weather maps. So just what is a dry line? As you might expect from the name, a dry line is a boundary separating a moist air mass from a dry air mass. There can also be a wind shift associated with a dry line, with southeast wind ahead of the dry line, while westerly winds are occurring behind the dry line. You may also hear it called a dew point front, since sharp changes in dew points can be observed across the dry line. You may also hear a rather local reference to the Marfa front, getting the name from Marfa, Texas, in far west Texas, where dry lines are quite common. Most of the time, the temperature difference across the dry line is very small or even absent. Dry lines are most commonly found just to the east of the Rocky Mountains, separating a warm, moist air mass east of the dry line from a hot, dry air mass to the west of the dry line. The moisture east of the dry line generally originates from the Gulf of Mexico. States like Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska frequently experience dry lines in the spring and summer months. Dry lines, however, are extremely rare east of the Mississippi River. Dry lines typically advance eastward during the afternoon, but they pull back to the west at night. Severe and sometimes tornadic thunderstorms often develop along a dry line or in the moist air just to the east of it, especially when it begins moving eastward. Another interesting element in our complex atmosphere. If you have a question about the weather, drop an email to question@weatherbrains.com.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
As the moon and planets move through the night sky, sometimes they catch up with one another, like race cars circling a track. They appear very close to us here on Earth, making these tiny but bright specks of light in the night sky easier to find and identify with the naked eye. Astronomers measure positions in the sky according to the celestial coordinate system, which is like a grid projected onto the inside of an imaginary sphere encasing the Earth. Positions are identified by right ascension and declination, which is similar to longitude and latitude lines here on Earth. When two bodies, such as a planet like Saturn and the Moon, lie at the same right ascension, this is called a conjunction. They will appear very close together, but maybe not at their closest. That point can vary by hours or even days as the declination continues to change, bringing the two bodies to a position called a pulse. Pulses happen most often between the Moon and planets, and this is because of the Moon's speedy 27-day journey through the sky. The Moon will nestle up to the planets twice this week, in fact, but those lunar pulses are visible only for a single night because of that speed. The further out the planet lies, the less often they appear that close to each other. The next pulse of Saturn and Jupiter, for example, doesn't happen until 2020, but it should be a good one. You'll struggle to see space between the two dots in the sky, with just 1/10 of a degree separating them. Once Alberto moves through, you can impress your friends with your knowledge of the night sky with 2 pulses this week. Look for the Moon and Saturn a little more than a degree apart on Thursday night, May 31st, and Mars a little over 3 degrees from the Moon on Saturday, June 3rd. Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Thank you very much, Tony Rice. Thank you, Brian Peters, for your weekly installment of This Week in Brian Peters Weather Knowledge. So, well, I guess it's just us. That was the fastest hour in WeatherBrains history, Brian Norcross. What happened to that hour? I don't know how we could have crammed Max in there too. It's good we're going to have you guys on different nights now.
All right, good. Well, it was a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, Scott Martin pointed out something just a moment ago, and I don't know if anyone else noticed it, but the new advisory says that it's a tropical depression now. Brian Peters? Just a mistake,
I just noticed that. I mean,
did they hear Brian Norcross on here talking about how much better looking it was and decided to go ahead and upgrade it.
No, I think it's just a royal screw up.
There you go. All right. Well, the people in Tennessee are excited they had a tropical depression. So maybe it'll come to Oklahoma, Kim, and be like that thing y'all had a few years ago.
Yeah, that'd be great. We would not argue with rain. I mean, obviously flooding is terrible too, but we'll take that over fire, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's just ridiculous. So, Kevin, we got you here for a second. Anything else you wanted to ask Brian or talk about?
No, I was fascinated by that's just a side thing, but that little temperature thing. I assume you guys got into. It was in the pre-show. We talked about subtropical. I suppose you guys did that while I was away. Probably
we did talk about that a bit.
Yeah.
But,
I'll go back and listen.
Missed it.
So Brian Norcross, was there anything that would have signaled to us that Alberto had become tropical? The presentation on radar, satellite, anything that hurricane hunters would have told us? What would it have been?
Well, there wouldn't be hurricane hunters, but obviously there are soundings and whatnot. The thing is near Nashville, so.
I mean, earlier when it was still over the Gulf, though.
Oh, when it was over the Gulf, yes. So they're looking closely at the 700 millibar temperatures and the temperature in the core, and and whatever the model is projecting, but also just from a very basic, what is the trough doing and how is the trough impacting the system? Quite often you can say this is not tropical. There's no anticyclone involved. This is driven by baroclinic, partially at least. The convection is partially driven by baroclinic processes. So that's a critical aspect of it. Now, as I said earlier, though, it looked much more like a tropical system over Alabama earlier today than it did over the Gulf. So it will be interesting to see what the Weather Prediction Center folks have done here, or whether it is just a screw up. Because if it had been a tropical depression, they would still be calling it a tropical depression. The temperature profile in the storm can support that description. It doesn't have to be a full hurricane or something. So anyway, it would be interesting to see a discussion of it.
So far, no official correction over here. So far from the folks at the Weather Prediction Center. That'll be interesting. We'll have to ask that question.
Obviously, they're not listening to the show.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're not one of the two people watching on BigBrainsMedia.com, huh, Brian? So, all right. Well, I guess it's just us, guys. We lost James. Any other discussion? Go 17 got some issues. That's a concern, isn't it? Anybody? No?
Yes.
I read a little bit about it. I think Morgan Palmer, tweeted something. I saw a little bit about it. But is this? I mean, do they think this is something? Has there been an update? Is this something that they think that they can work out?
I don't know. I hope so. That's an expensive satellite.
Very much so.
I know it wouldn't be a total loss, but it sounded like it would be seriously degraded. But hopefully they'll work that out. And then this tremendous flood again in Ellicott City, Maryland this weekend. That just was mind-blowing.
Incredible.
And I may have stolen your thunder there, Aubrey. I didn't know.
Oh, no, that's okay, because I got to head out to show. That's one of my picks is an article by a meteorologist who's no longer in TV, but still has an amazing, tremendous following up in the Baltimore area. Really explains it well, talks about the historical floods in the past, and kind of looks at the terrain and the uniqueness of this city and this historic city with some of the terrain and how some of the rivers kind of converge and everything kind of comes together, and it's just situated in a very, very, very horrible spot.
Well, and we were talking about being out and about in these storms, whether it's just a minor storm, thunderstorms, tornadoes, tropical storm, and then we have the heartbreaking news that out of South Carolina. I guess it actually happened in North Carolina, but Spartanburg TV media person and his photojournalist were killed by a falling tree out covering the weather, I suppose, yesterday. That was heartbreaking news. And Brian Peters, you drive around a lot in these storms down here in Alabama. Does that give you pause?
Oh, yes. Always looking for trees to come in from the edges of the roads. Very pleased that Alabama is doing a lot of work on highways to keep the trees trimmed back, and that's a lot of work. It really is. But yes, and plus there was a child killed by lightning the 29th today. Oh, that's today. I'm sorry. I thought today was the 30th. Today is the 29th. Earlier today up in Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
Hey, Bill, can I jump and do pick of the week? Because
let's do it. Let's start picks of the week with Kevin.
I'm hijacking something from Rick. He tweeted out earlier today this neat thing. The caption on it, if I can get back to it, is he tagged Gary England. He said a friend is trying to trace the origins of this device, and there's a picture of it. It's called a Griffin tornado alarm, and it looks like something that might be back in the 50s, made by Coleman Instrument Company in Tulsa. And it's a really neat picture, but some people in the comments and responding to him, somebody found the operating instructions for it. The number one step, this thing is based on pressure, apparently. The number one step, it says, call the weather, radio, or TV station and ask for your local barometric pressure reduced to sea level. Loosen the screw on the back of each end of the alarm, remove the cover, and then rotate the dial to the pressure. So this is some sort of a tornado alarm based on pressure, and we're 30 seconds away from the show, so I'll bid you all farewell.
And it's on eBay for $25.
How much warning you would get when the tornado was coming, too. Yeah. Brian, go ahead, Brian Peters.
Yeah, it's on eBay for $25.
Oh my goodness, I might have to get one of those. That's pretty cool, though.
For the WeatherBrains Historical Museum.
There you go. So, Brian Peters, what's your pick of the week?
I get the foghorn.
Wah, wah. I was trying to figure out how to spell that the other day.
Too busy. So
yeah,
too many things going on.
Kim, I'm coming to you next. What's your pick of the week?
Yeah, my pick was actually an NPR study or NPR story covering the Harvard study of the Maria fatalities. And Brian, you did a great job describing the indirect fatalities and different measures of it earlier. I'll just note for the audience, when you see that figure, try to resist the urge to compare it to, the fatality statistics from other hurricanes, because this is calculated very differently, and not every hurricane of history have they done this, extensive an attempt in our official record, to try to count those indirects, and it can be a complicated matter. So, but thank you so much again, Brian, for the great discussion on that.
And that was a great segue there too, Brian. I don't know, it's almost like you knew what she was going to talk about.
Well, we try and stay informed here. It's in the, as they say, that Miami sticks out like a sore thumb into Hurricane Alley, and we're right at the tip of the thumb here. So I just want to recommend to you, if you haven't seen it, that you look up Yabacoa, Puerto Rico Hurricane Maria YouTube video. It is the most amazing hurricane, unexplained, maybe one of the most unexplained weather phenomenon videos that I've seen, actually.
That's really cool. We were talking about Span and his little poolside mini water spouts there during Alberto, and I think I remember, was it Bettis in Harvey or Matthew or somewhere, Irma, maybe it was Irma, standing on the side of the road somewhere.
Oh, right. Yes, he was in Naples. Exactly.
Yeah.
He was in Naples. Yes, right.
What looked like a small spin-up tornado.
Right, and I think
right there on the camera.
Tornado, actually, that was a spin-up vortex related to roughness or downdrafts or something in the overall laminar flow.
Anything else you want to add, Brian? How can people find you?
So I'm on Facebook when there's something going on. I'm posting on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at bnorcross. But I'm not like you guys. I wait for something to happen. And
well, that really is a dream team there with you and Matt.
Yeah, so it's wonderful. And this is the station I started at in Miami in 1983.
Wow.
When I came to Miami originally in 1983, it's the same TV station. And really, it was after the Irma experience, what I realized is it's really important to talk to people locally. When I did the Facebook thing, I had almost 9 million reach my few days of doing Facebook before Irma. mostly in South Florida. And so when they asked and said, would you like to come join Max? I said, absolutely. Do that. Although I'm still working with the Weather Channel, and to the extent that I'm available, I'm still close with them. So, and I miss my friends there actually. But what can you do? Only being one. And I've always lived in Miami, even working at the Weather Channel. So I'm still home.
Well, good. Well, it's been great having you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't have Max, but we'll schedule him again in the future and get Google Hangouts all worked out before we get there. It's just shocking. We had such a perfect test today. I was so pleased on the side of the road in the middle of the Northwest Florida Panhandle that it worked like a charm, and then we couldn't make it work tonight. So I was sad about that, but give him our best. Hope you guys don't spend too much time together this
so do I.
season.
All right. Take care, guys.
Now, my pick of the week is the site that Brian referred to a little earlier, or at least knew about, Bob Hart's site about tropical cyclone or cyclone evolution, and indicates differences or when a storm is tropical or subtropical. I've bookmarked that. That is my pick of the week, and I'm going to be really excited to use that as we have these subtropical cyclones. And I saw some indications. I didn't look deeply into it, but I heard someone say that we might have a similar setup in about 10 days to what caused Alberto. Any thoughts on that, Brian Norcross?
Loosely maybe. It looks like the Central American gyre, the so-called CAG, is going to redevelop, which it often does this time of year. And if there's it's a very volatile pattern with the jet stream. The northern stream is a high amplitude. So if it dips down again and snags a piece of vorticity out of that Central American gyre, you have a similar, that was the scenario. But I don't know, forecasting these things say much more than it's a loose maybe, I think would be overstating.
Exactly. Well, we could use a little more rain here in Alabama always. So, all right, Kim, I guess we've got you, we've got Kevin's tie, we've got Brian and me. We're all that's left now.
Skeleton crew.
We're having
of a crew.
Tying lessons here with Kevin Selly. So we should have just recorded that and put it on YouTube. But Kim, anything else to add?
Late breaking news here. I just saw that the Ellicott City rainfall has been they've sort of done the recurrence frequency analysis, and it exceeds a 1,000-year flood event for the second time in 2 years.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
That is pretty crazy. Not a surprise to anyone who saw what happened this weekend, but certainly a very devastating thing for that area, and something that should make us all think a little bit.
Don't we all love statistics?
Don't we all?
Yes.
Exactly. Well, upcoming guests here on WeatherBrains next week, we're excited and holding our breath that Ken Graham will join us, the new incoming director of the National Hurricane Center. Tentatively has been able to tell us that he could join us, and I've reached out to him. We'll try to make sure that we can have him. We've got the editor of the Farmer's Almanac on June the 11th. I'm sure that's going to be an interesting show for the Accelerant. Then we'll have Dr. Phil Klotzbach on the 18th. Kim's got a great show for us on the 25th, right, Kim? Ben May and Joe Tankersley. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
And all these dates are going to probably get screwed up because I've still got to go back and put in James's vacation. So there's 2 vacation weeks coming up, and those are going to get messed up somewhere along the way. Joe DeLeo is going to join us on the 9th of July. That's really exciting. I saw a great story recently about, pyrocumulonimbus, having the same effect as volcanoes, in terms of ash in the atmosphere. And that's a pretty interesting story. So David Peterson is going to join us on the 16th. And Aubrey's got a show for us on July 23rd. And we're going to come back with more volcano talk on July 30th with Patricia Gregg. Just lots of great guests that are spread out through the summer. But we're really excited to have had you tonight. Brian, thank you for joining us. And we'll have you back anytime that you're free.
All right.
All right. Aubrey, anything else to add? I mean, Aubrey, not Aubrey. Kim. I'm tired. It's been a long weekend.
Yeah.
Aubrey, Kim.
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. Well, until next week, when we have Ken Graham, I'm Bill Murray. Got Kim Clucko here, Brian Norcross. Thank you for joining us. And until we join you next week, I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday night.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, Brian.
Bye.
Bye, Kimmer.
I forgot WeatherBrains. We had a good show tonight. Ooh, and we are still on the WeatherBrains. Let me turn this one off. Look at that. 12 people are still watching a blank stream. All right. Hello. We are now simulcasting on WeatherBrains and Song of the Night. I love a simulcast. If you want to come join us over on Song of the Night, hit me up on the Twitter, and we'll see you guys there. For those watching WeatherBrains, thank you all for watching. Have a great week, and God bless. See you on